Welcome everyone, my name is Chris Rusch. So in order to get into the power hammer story, I got to go back in time a little bit. Kind of start at the semi-beginning in the 90s. I worked for a company that made high-speed wrapping equipment. And I was the head engineer of that company, and we made a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool machines, nothing car related. But on the other side of the coin, I was a car guy. I was building a Lamborghini Countach. This is like 1995. And like everybody at that time had the picture of the Lamborghini Countach hanging on their wall. And I was like, well, I can't afford one, obviously. I'm just a dude working at a place. So what does every guy think at that age? I'm going to make my own. So I started building a car from scratch. I was able to get access to a real car. So I had a real Lamborghini Countach that was burnt up in a fire. So I had one car sitting here, another car sitting here, and I copied the frame identically. So I made a complete tube chassis, boom, boom, part for part, car for car. So I found some doors, some burnt out doors, put it on the car. Well, anyhow, that's kind of how the development of Rusch Machine and Design came about, was building this car. So I was working for this company, doing high-speed wrapping equipment. On the other side at home, as my hobby, I was building a car. If you're familiar with the Lamborghini Countach at all, there's only a handful of tubes on the car that need to be bent. There's a couple front bonnet pieces, center the tunnel piece where the transmission goes through, and that's about it. Maybe a couple other pieces. So while I'm building this car, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to bend these two pieces of tubing. That's basically what it boiled down to. And I'm like, well, hell, I'm a machine designer. I design machines for this company. I'll just design my own tubing bender. So basically that's what I did. I designed a very crude rudimentary tubing bender to bend these handful of tubes. It basically evolved into Rusch Machine and Design. So I had this tubing bender. People would come in my shop. My shop was always like the go-to place because it's the crazy kid down the block building a car in his garage. Now everybody's kind of doing it, but back then it wasn't such a big deal. They weren't really impressed with the car, they were impressed with the tubing bender. They're like, oh man, this thing's really freaking cool, So I got the brainstorm. I'm like, well, if I needed one, somebody else needs one too. So I packaged it better and made 3 of them and went to a trade show. And voila, I got a bunch of interest and people loved the thing. And I started making tubing benders. Long story short, quit my job, started making tubing benders, and that was the beginning of Rusch Machine and Design. So that's the company in yellow. So during the same time I was working at that other company, I was working part-time, building the car, working part-time for a guy called Mark Garish. I don't know, you guys might know him, might follow him on Instagram, Metal Shapes by Marco. Well, he was the big influence for me in how metal shaping came into play. So at that time, Mark was building Cobras, 427 Cobras, 289 Cobras, and the like from scratch in our little town in Wisconsin. So he had all the machinery, Yoders, Eckholds, Polmaxes, all the stuff, and I would work there part-time at night. And I was good with just general fabrication, but I knew nothing about metal shaping, nothing at all. And Mark is in there making all these car parts and stuff, and taking the flat aluminum sheets and turning them into Cobras, and my mind was like, how is this possible? I can't believe that this is even possible. Taking flat sheets of metal and turning it into body panels. So that was the spark for metal shaping for me, and I was hooked at that point that I wanted to be involved in that somehow. But in running a business and trying to make money and trying to succeed and feed the family, I had to keep making tubing benders for a while. So years went by, tubing benders, did well for me. And we were at a place in our company where I'm like, I want to make a metal machine that can do what we used to do on working on these Cobras and stuff. So throughout the years, I had always wanted a Yoder, a Polmax, all this stuff that my friend Mark had, but I just had a garage at home, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to fit a Yoder in my garage. There's no way I'm going to fit a Polmax in my garage. They're all 3-phase. I don't have 3-phase. And it was just a big problem to do that for a guy in my garage that wanted to finish his Lamborghini. So I'm like, well, someday I'm going to make a machine that combines all of these functions into one machine, and I can do all this really cool stuff in my garage, plug it into the wall, it'll fit through the door. So that's the MH19 behind you. Probably around 2007-ish, the MH19 came to life for the first one. I built the prototype. Shane and I got involved, and we started releasing this stuff to the world, to the marketplace. And back in those times, There was nothing available. The only other option that you had was a Yoder, and nobody was selling them or making them at the time. So you had to either buy a used one and completely refurbish it, because a lot of them were, were sitting outside for years. They were considered scrap metal for a lot of places. And they were really expensive, really big, and hard to put into the average shop. So that was the option. So there was really no options. So like I said, Shane and I, we kind of released this to the world and to the metal shaping thing. And I think we really helped to revitalize this industry and bring metal shaping, in making it achievable, a lot more achievable for everybody to get involved. Well, with that, it wasn't just the MH19, and then we evolved in other areas of metal shaping. We did English wheel, we did shrinker and stretcher, all the subsidiary machines that all tie everything together. So with that being said, my demonstration for you guys, and we're going to go through the functions of the machine, and my demonstration is this is a fiberglass version of a Cobra hood scoop, like for a 427 Cobra, and we're going to make an aluminum version. So, and you guys are going to have the ability to duplicate what I do to produce this. So before we get started on that, I'm going to go through the functions and features of the MH19. So MH stands for multi-hammer, meaning it has multiple functions. 19 is the throat depth from the center line of here to the back of the machine. So that's the name MH19. One of the great things, like I had mentioned earlier with the MH19, is it's a single phase machine. The height, I don't remember the exact height right now, I can measure it, but it'll fit in most garages to get them inside garage doors. So it's under 80 inches, under 7 feet. So that was a big design criteria for me, was to make it achievable to get in garages and be single phase. With that, the MH19 has a plethora of adjustability, which other machines on the market maybe have, maybe don't have, but all the adjustments on this one you can do on the fly. So actually, as the machine is running, you can adjust the stroke, you can adjust the height. So that makes it really unique. The other function, like I had mentioned, multi-hammer, meaning it can run in power hammer mode, or it can run in rigid mode, which is like a Pomax. So power hammer mode runs with a spring. So that means as you speed the machine up, it has a whipping action, and it throws this ram and throws it onto the metal, and the weight of the ram is how much hit that you get. So I believe it's a 17-pound ram in here, and with acceleration and stuff, that's how much power you get to produce a hammering effect. Now, if you want to do like straight line beadwork or like Pomax work, then we have a shear pin right here. This is an aluminum shear pin, and in it are weak points that we cut in it on purpose. And that's if you, for some reason, have the machine adjusted improperly and you turn it on and the dies come together, it'll break the pin and not break the machine. But you put this pin in when you do rigid mode. And what rigid mode is that means that these two come together and there's no flex in the top one. It's two rigid points coming together. And that duplicates what a Pomax does. So with that, the machine also has, I'll just set it here. With that, the machine also has adjustable stroke, meaning that I can control how much hit or stroke that top ram has. So there's a gauge on the side over on this side, and it starts off at 175 thousandths and goes to just over a ½ inch. And that's, how do I want to say it? That's physical stroke when you're not running it on the fly. That doesn't take into account the whip of the spring. So as you speed it up, the whip of the ram, so it'll actually stroke like an inch. So if you have it set to a half, once it's flying, it's throwing the top ram like an inch. And that creates your hit. So higher the stroke, harder the hit. Same with speed. So the two things that give you a harder hit are speed and stroke. More stroke, more hit, more speed, more hit. So now what we're going to be doing is aluminum, and this is 3003H14 aluminum. It's really soft stuff, so we're not going to even be coming close to using the maximum hit of the machine, or I'm just going to be making junk. So you want to use maximum hit for steels, but for aluminums you can back it way off, and that's a really nice feature. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to demo, and you can kind of hear. So I'm just going to run the machine a little bit. Let's see. Just got to let that heat up a minute. Okay, so with your ears, I'm just going to, this is always a good demo, so I'll start at the minimum stroke. Okay, and you can you can hear that hit with your ears. So as it's running, I'm going to increase the stroke, and then with your ears, you can hear the hit increasing. So that's to maximum. So that's minimum to maximum as we're running it. So I like to do that one because you can actually hear it, and I'm not just telling you it's doing it. You can hear it for yourself. So that's one thing. Another adjustment is the height adjustment here. So this is basically setting your tool gap. So when the ram is completely down, I like to set it around 1/4 inch almost for everything. That seems to be its happy place. But if you have different tool thicknesses and such, you can adjust your height like that. So real easy adjustments, and that's what makes it really nice. The next really easy adjustment are tool changes. So no wedges or anything. You just drop your ram, pull your tools out, switch them with whatever you want, and put them back in. So quick and easy tool changes. And that's a really big plus. Like I had mentioned earlier, if you're in the middle of a part, tool changes suck because you're focusing on your part. You're like, oh, I got to change tools to get to the next operation, where this kind of takes a lot of that pain away. With that being said, we're going to start making the part. Everybody good? I'm really going to brush over this because we're limited for time on how to, but this is a paper pattern. Okay, so on this paper pattern, I have marked everything that I feel I need to do to make this part. So it's really important in paper patterns. It's your guide. It's your guideline. It's your roadmap to what you're making. So you're not just kind of winging it. So if you have something you're duplicating, a paper pattern is a lifesaver because you can always look at it and see what needs to be done. So on this paper, basically I just transferred all of the points of the part I'm trying to duplicate onto the paper pattern. So first thing I like to do, especially on a symmetrical part, is mark your center line. So you can kind of always base everything back off of your center line. So I marked the center line, and that's kind of my guide. And along this paper pattern, I put a line right down the center of the radius, which is your light line, and followed that all the way around. And then I marked, so this is a real gradual shrink that's on here. So if you have a more compound shape or a compound curve, your paper is going to bunch up more. And that's going to give you more, or going to show you more shrink that's required. This is a very minimal shrink operation. So Mike tomorrow is going to show you a more aggressive shrink and then a different paper pattern that shows it way more in detail. This part that we're making has very minimal shrink, but it is part of it, so we're going to do it. So on here, you can kind of see as I wrap this paper around here, it bunches up. So basically, I hold the paper until I see where it bunches. And it bunches from here to here. So that's where I marked it, that area needs to be shrunk because the paper is bunching up there. So the paper needs to come together here. Obviously I can't pull paper together other than folding it, but in metal I can shrink it. So I can shrink that metal together to pull that, to duplicate what that paper wants to do. So then I also mark where the flange is going to be tipped along here. And that's going to get transferred after I get the general shape put in this. So the first thing we're going to do, so I transferred all my marks onto here. Okay, all my marks are transferred. I did that earlier just to save some time, so I'm not doing it while everybody's just watching. So what we're going to do is, even though this part is basically flat, it basically is flat, so we're going to deviate from that a little bit just to show the effects of putting a little crown into it. So I'm going to put a real light crown into this just to get rid of this flatness, and I'm just going to tighten up the panel and get it going in the direction I want. Very little bit, you're going to barely see it on there, but it really helps in deforming it and keeping the part to give it some structure so it's not just this flat wobbly panel. I'm just going to give this what they call like a little washover here with a 36-inch crown. That's the smallest radius that I have here, and that's just going to put a real light crown into the top of this part. This is a little solution that we mix up, and it just helps the panel glide real easy through the tools. A lot of times when it's dry, this is kind of loaded because some people like to do their stuff dry, some people like to do it lubed. And I mean, it's more personal preference. I like it to have a little lube on the bottom of it because it just makes it slide on the lower tool a little better. So I like a little bit to get started. I was set to maximum stroke, and I don't need to do that for aluminum. So I'm just bringing it up a little bit so it doesn't hit as hard. So that's the demo right there. So how many passes did I do? Like 3.5-ish or something like that. So it already took the flatness out of the panel. And for this operation, that's all I'm going for. I'm not going for a big voluptuous crown or nothing. I'm just trying to get that tension released from the panel, and it just makes working everything else a lot easier. It kind of gives me a direction. So now I spun it around and I'm just doing the other side. So now it's even, it has the same amount on both sides. And this is just a piece of metal I had them cut for me earlier, but you can see just that little bit of light around it, giving it just that little bit of crown. Not a lot, and I didn't do the middle on purpose because if we're trying to duplicate, this one is flat. So I'm trying to leave that flat and just give it, like I said, just a little bit of tension. That's it. All right, so step 1 is done. Step 2 is we're going to start shrinking now. So I'm going to do a quick tool change. So we have a vast array of tools that are available for the machine, and because this is such a minimal shrink operation, I'm going to use the smallest shrink dies that we offer. And the smallest dies, we call them mini shrinks, and these are thumbnail shrinking dies. I know, maybe everybody isn't familiar with them, but this is the best way to shrink, in my opinion, on a power hammer. So this type of shrinking doesn't induce a lot of stress into the panel, where mechanical shrinking does. So mechanical shrinking, it like forces it, and that metal just feels like, sometimes you can't avoid mechanical shrinking, you have to do it in some applications. But if I ever have a choice between the two, I will thumbnail shrink. The metal is already pounded into that shape, it wants to be there, that's its new home, and it likes it. Yeah, hit me up as I'm changing tools or whatever. I'll answer anything the best I can. So because these tools are different thicknesses than the main tools, it's going to require me to change my my tool gap. So see right there, so now that's about a 1/2 inch. So I've tightened it up, and I said, like, between 1/8 and 1/4 is where I like to run just about everything. Again, doing aluminum, especially with thumbnail dies, with steel you need a lot of power to do thumbnail dies. So you got to kind of crank up your stroke. With aluminum, this stuff is pretty soft, so I can take some hit out of it as we're doing aluminum. So I'm just going to back it off a little bit. And I may be going like too fast for everybody, and you'll kind of get the hang of it and the feel of the machine. But I'm kind of doing all this just from experience, that I've ran this machine a lot. I know what it likes. I know where it kind of needs to be to do operations. So if you see me making changes, I'm making them for a reason typically. Seeing this area is so small and short, I'm gonna split my distances and stay, maybe 1 inch apart, and then I'm gonna split those in between and go in between them. And that's really my only pattern that I'm going to do here. So I marked this dashed line because that's where I'm going to be watching the back of my tool to hit. So that is kind of important if you want a nice accurate light line, is you want your shrinking depths to go to a known position. So that makes your, like when you start planishing it out, it makes your crown look really nice. So like if I oopsie and shrink way into here, then that's going to be there, and there might be a bad spot here that I'm going to have to stretch back out. I might have to go in there and hammer and dolly it to stretch that back out. So I'm going to be watching pretty close. When I'm watching, I'm going to be looking between the dies. So you'll see me, you'll see me looking down like this, and I'm looking at the shrink. I'm watching the shrink, and that takes practice. And you guys will be experiencing that tomorrow. You watch the shrink, you watch how far it goes, and then I should say there's a lot to it, but everything has a feel to it. So once you get a good shrink and you know what it takes to do that, you're not paying attention to that anymore. You're paying attention to how deep you're shrinking, where you're going, where you're stopping. That's what's important. So that's one round of shrinking. So you can see it starting to move, and you can see it from the side. It's already starting to pull around. So we're going to be shrinking this, and I did forget to bring my gauge. So I normally have for something like this, I would have an angle gauge. So I'd keep shrinking until that angle is what I want it to be. So I forgot that, so I'm just going to kind of eyeball it. I know from experience it takes like 3 or 4 passes on this to get it to where I want it to go. The other thing that's hard for beginners to do is the throttle control. I was feathering the throttle there, so I wasn't letting the control do it. Where this is the speed setting on here, I was controlling it with the throttle. So if you heard it go real lightly, that's me controlling it with the foot pedal. So with aluminum, if you go too hard, too fast, wide open, you'll get what's called coining. It'll hit so hard that when you come out, it hammers the end here and squeezes it together and makes like a razor sharp coin that looks like a coin that comes out. So you guys will experience it tomorrow. If you do get those, just be careful because they turn into razor blades, and you can slice your hand real easy. So I try to work from one side to the other and do the same. Boom, 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 and I'll jump back and forth until I get them both equal amounts, equal shrink. So what a lot of people will do is they'll shrink and they'll pull up. Well, that's the worst thing you can do because it's like stretches it back out, and then you end up with a ducktail. So as the shrink gets more and more and more, I start pulling down more and more and more, but I'm not pulling down a lot, not yet. It's like once the shrink has to get developed first, and then you can start really working it and using leverage to make it shrink even faster. But because I'm not going to be doing it that much with this, because this doesn't need to be shrunk that much. It's like when you're trying to get a really tight 90, really close into something that needs a ton of shrink, and you just keep working it, working it, working it, and it seems like it's not getting there. And when it's not getting there, then you start pulling down on it, and you'll see it, it'll just start drawing together. All right, so there you see the shrink is coming in. So I'm gonna do, it's probably 2 more passes of the same thing I just did, and it will be where we wanna be. So it looks equal on both sides, so I'm going to do 1 more pass. Same thing on each side, and then I'm going to shrink here in the middle to just draw that together. And then we're going to go over to the English wheel, and we're going to roll this in. So that last pass I did was I just hit a couple in the middle there to basically finish it off from here to here. So that's at basically the same angle all the way around. I might have to do a little more in here, but we'll see once I get this rolled in and see how it lays on here. It's basically right there to where we want to be. Okay, so next we're going to go over to this English wheel over here, and we're going to put in what's called a form. This is the English wheel we built. Again, I can go through some of the features of this as well. Has quick release, lower holder, kick adjuster down here. Very thick. These are 1/2-inch plates. Big throat. It's super, super rigid. Great machine. There's English wheel guys and there's power hammer guys, and it doesn't seem like there's a cross between 2 of them. So there's people that love the wheel, hate the power hammer, love the power hammer, hate the wheel. I'm kind of in between. I'm indifferent, although I do lean towards using the power hammer more. Just it seems like it's faster to me and I can control it better. Where English wheel does have that little bit of black magic to it, where if you don't roll it right, and it seems to me like every time I use a wheel for something critical, I'll overstretch it, because you want to see results quick. So you put too much pressure on it, bam, you're overstretched, and now you got junk and you got to start over. So where the power hammer seems like if you're trying to put a low crown into something, you can creep up on it a lot more, and it doesn't happen as fast. And that may seem kind of counterintuitive, but the wheel, it seems like it's super easy to overstretch. So this one is a little different application though, and this is where the wheel comes in real handy. So this is the upper wheel is rubber coated. So basically we use this to put impression into it, and we're going to force this shape into this rubber top die, and that's going to put this that first rolled edge into this panel. So this is form, not shape. They're different. So I'm gonna eyeball it. What a lot of people have done, I've seen it. They'll put tape on here. They'll run a Sharpie line on here to follow center. I'm gonna eyeball it. So I'm gonna be trying to follow this line that I transferred over from my paper pattern onto here. So I'm gonna follow that the best I can, just by eye. And then we're going to, because we don't have a tight enough radius to duplicate what I'm trying to make over there, This is basically just getting it started, getting it in the right place, and then I'm going to finish it off with muscle on the bench and a piece of tubing. I'm basically going to wrap it around a piece of tubing. So to get it started, you can't do it all in one pass. You got to walk your way up into it. So I'm just getting it so there's some tension on the wheel, and then I just give it a little bit for the first pass. So that might even be too much. So. Okay, so there we go. So when you guys are using this again, it's real important to have gloves on, because you do have to put a fair amount of force on this to push it through, and if you slip, you're going to slice yourself. So just a reminder. So right now it's not too much force, but the more pressure I put on the bottom, it's going to increase that. So I'm just rolling it, following my line, and I'm going to increase the force and go back. There we go. So that's about all we're going to get out of this operation, but it gets it started, it gets a nice radius in it, and it follows straight down the line. And then what a lot of people do too, if you're doing work over and over, kind of just trying to do the same part, is they'll put a piece of tape on one of the wheels, and then you can like put marks on the floor or whatever, so you can get the same tension setting every time. So if you're going back to something, you're not like lost on where was I type thing. There we go. All right, so hood scoop halfway there. So now I'm going to finish this off. I'm going to clamp a piece of pipe in that vise over there, and I'm just going to muscle it and try and duplicate the angle of the part I'm trying to create. So a weird thing about sheet metal shaping is, and me included, when I first started doing some smaller sheet metal work and stuff, I was always like, well, it's got to come off the machine and boom, it's got to fit right away. That's not the case. So there's a lot of hand manipulating with parts, and you don't kind of realize that until you start playing the game a little bit, where you can muscle this stuff around and work it to where you want it to go. So getting something to come right off the machine and drop right on a part is tough and maybe impossible. So you have to do some hand manipulating almost with every part you make. So I'm just putting body weight into it and trying not to put a digger in here. So basically I just carried that to see from where it was to where it is now. I just carried that around. So what it's showing me is I'm going to need a little bit more shrink here to get rid of this little bubble. But before I do that, I'm going to planish this out. So first I'm going to get this side to match. And again, I'm kind of guessing here. Yeah, so it's pretty damn close. So this is where I want to be ambidextrous. So just with a little thumb manipulation, and I'm eyeballing here. I got it pretty close. This one needs a little bit more. All right, so that being said, I'm going to shrink just a little bit more because I see these two bubbles right here. So I'm kind of only shrinking where the metal is telling me right now that it needs to be shrunk, and that's just in this general area right here on both sides. See how I tuned that up nice? So it makes a much nicer transition. A 3, that's too big, I'm sorry, or just a smidge smaller than what you're trying to do. So a 3 is too big throughout here. So a 2, it's kind of a transition thing, but I'm gonna go with a 2. Why? Because that's the one we have. You know, with aluminum, like I had mentioned earlier, especially on an air hammer, you don't want to hit too hard. If you hit too hard, you'll just put dents in here that you are gonna have a struggle to get out later. And I have some of that in my test one. So even with, you know, with any part, there's some finishing work that's going to be entailed. But I dialed this thing in before, so I got it a real low, nice, light little tap, and that should smooth that up real nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow my line, which is kind of disappearing, but I can see it good enough. So, you know, air hammering is one of them things where you can spend a lot of time to really refine something and get it really nice. You know, for sake of demonstration, I'm not going to keep going on it, but I'll go in here a little later, and you know, I can tune out some of them bigger bumps. But you know, basically, it's a transition that we want, creating that nice radius into my shrunken area. That's pretty good. It's pretty symmetrical. It looks halfway decent. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to tip that edge. Basically, I take a piece of 3/4 inch tape line and I tape it along here. I bend it, I beat it right on that thing, and it lays flat. If you're doing this from scratch, you probably wouldn't have that luxury, and you'd have to lay it down, get it blocked up, maybe put a scribe line or a pencil line on here to find out that height that you want to tip it at. Again, we're getting into kind of advanced metal shipping at that point. But what I'm talking about is showing functionality here. So I'm just going to tape line this. So you can do this with, you know, with a Sharpie as well. But you know, I find tape lines are real nice when you're going through a machine. It really aids to the visual effect, and you can follow it. You can follow it really good with your eyes. All right, so now we're going to tip that. So we're going to go over to the bead roller. I didn't talk about the bead roller at all. Of course, I'm biased. I designed this bead roller. I love this bead roller. I mean, it has everything, in my opinion, of course I'm biased, but everything you'd want in a bead roller. And the biggest feature, in my opinion, again, is the quick release height and down. So if you're doing any type of work, you don't have to remember where your setting is. And you can lead into panels, which is really nice. So another thing that's really great about this machine is it has a side control. So if you're sit down and you're parked and you're doing a lot of work on one side, you can set the control to be on this side. Or if you want to work on that side, you flip it to side 2, you go to the other side, and then these controls work on this side. So it's really nice. And the handle can be switched to the other side as well. So if you want to work from this side or that side, you can. And like I said, like if you're doing beadwork tomorrow, and we're going to get into more of that, like when you're doing artsy style beadwork, you don't want to just bonk, pop it in. A lot of times it just leaves a deep impression and then it goes. You want to flow it in. So you can get your panel started, get some tension on it, start your flow, and then snap it in. And it gives that real gradual lead in and makes really nice, nice bead lines. So what I'm doing here, this is a pretty basic operation. Again, this isn't the machine doing everything. You're going to see me manipulating the machine, and meaning that I'm going to be pulling up on this panel in order to get it to start tipping in the direction that I want it to go. So I'm going to be following this tape line. I'm going to get it just started, and this is going to be a multiple pass operation. It's not going to do it in one swath. So I'm going to get it going. Basically, my first pass is just going to be to put a witness line in it, and it's just going to get it started. Once that witness line is there and established, then following it is much easier. So my next time, I can put some more pressure on it, and it'll follow that line really good. So get some depth here. So you can kind of feel on the handle when it makes contact right there. So I'm just giving it a little bit. So if you can see, I'm twisting about that much. So I'm just helping it ever so slightly to get that bead started. This first one isn't going to do much other than put a slight impression in the panel. So this is where it gets a little wonky, is going around the corner here. What? It's got to look over there. So Shane, if you wanted to help out so we can keep this train going a little bit, I need Mike might have some. I need 2 Clecos and an 1/8 inch drill bit and a drill.
Mike.
I don't know if he brought a drill along or not. I kind of forgot about it. But if we want to put that bead in the...
Okay. Hey, Mike. You got Clecos?
All right, so that's one pass. And then from the top, you can't really see it that much, but from the bottom, you can see the beginning of the edge tipped. So this next pass, I'm going to go a little more, like quarter turnish. And now I'm going to be pulling up a little harder. It should track my line a little better because it's already established. So now I'm pulling up. You can't really see it, but I'm pushing up with some force underneath to try and help that edge fold over. Now there's guys that run the bead roller every day, and they're just magicians with it, and they could do this like without even looking at it and follow the line and keep it perfectly in track. I'm not that coordinated, so I gotta stop and go to keep it tracking properly. But that's pretty good. So I can kind of see what needs work. So I can keep going on the bead roller. I can do a little bit of hammer and dolly work to get that to lay flat. I just noticed that this front here just needs a little bit. That fixed that. This one, it's a little wonky. But there you go. Just not too bad. I went a little too much here, but we can knock that down pretty quick with the hammer. So, voila, flanges. So what I'm going to do, there's just a little bit that has to get trimmed off of here to because it's a slight arc in the front. So if you look, so that's the arc. So this front has a little curve to it. So I'm going to trim that first, and then we're going to advance it about 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to clamp it to my little hammer form fixture here. And I'm just going to hammer that around. We created a hammer form for this, but you wouldn't have to have one. You could roll this over by hand. It would be a little challenging, but it could be done. So it'd be, pretty much just hammer and dolly work. So I'm just kind of eyeballing. About 3/8 of an inch is what we want. And it kind of follows the same principle if anybody's done wire edging. It takes up a certain amount of material to wrap a wire edge, and you can calculate that, and I could have done that here too as well. All right, so I'm just making sure I got equal amounts all the way around. All right, looks pretty good. So this is where the leather slapper comes in handy. On aluminum, it's great because it doesn't leave a bunch of hammer marks and dent impressions and things like that. So I'm just going to start walking it around. The hard part with this one is the simple rolled edge in the middle goes like gravy, but this all has to get shrunk here on these corners. So that's where the hammer and dolly comes in. So basically I get, or I'm not, sorry, hammer and dolly, but just hammer work. So I get it started, and then and that basically holds it in place, and then I'll start hammering those shrinks down. So this is, I consider this whack-a-mole. So when you're hammering shrinks together, it creates a pucker, creates a pucker, creates a pucker, and you just basically chase it around until it follows it all the way around. But that ball peen hammer comes in handy to finish off the underside. All right, so that corner looks pretty good. Again, it's not perfect. I mean, a lot of this metal shaping stuff takes a lot of time to get something into finished goods, but this is considered a roughed in hood scoop. This is where I need to be ambidextrous again. All right, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but that front edge is basically rolled over. All right, one final step to go. We're going to put a bead down the middle, and we're going to demonstrate rigid mode on here. So I know that the dies are 2 inches in diameter. So off the center line, I'm going to measure 1 inch, and I'm going to cleco a guide onto here. So like I mentioned, another good way to do this instead of clecoing it is you can use 2-way sticky tape and tape your guides on, and then you don't have holes to patch up in the future. Just got to do a quick pre-stretch. And again, I'm just gonna be winging it on the pre-stretch. So because this top die is also a 2-inch die, it's gonna pre-stretch right in the correct area. All right, so now we're gonna put the machine into rigid mode, put on the beating dies. So say your panel can't go upside down, it's got to go this way. You can reverse the tools to put the bead in whichever way you want. These should be the same thickness. Well, actually, I take that back. This is going to be different because we're going to be in rigid mode. So I'm going to put the pin in. So this pin is what I was talking about earlier, which locks the machine. Basically, it locks the spring out. So our spring is no longer going to be used. Okay, so now we're in rigid mode. So now what I do is I set my gap to the, basically to the panel thickness. But we can walk our way into it. So you can use like any part of the metal to get your gap right. You just got to make sure you're at the downward most part of your stroke.
Is your aluminum 63,000?
Just 50.
50? Okay.
So I'm just going until I feel some resistance. Right there. That's where we're going to run it. Let's see here. So typically I run the beating dies at the shortest stroke, but sometimes you have to run it at a bigger stroke if you need to get your panel in. So let's see, I'm gonna make sure I do this right. Yeah. So this is, sometimes it takes an extra hand. So we want to be beating, we're going to be pushing the bead up. There you go, thank you. And you want to make sure that this is where things can get bad, is if you get off the fence, So I always do a test run here to make sure that it goes where I want it to go. So I'm going to put a line on how far I want the bead to go. So I know that my stretch ends here, so I'm going to go with my die out to there. Same here, I'm going to run my die right out to my extra hole. That's my stop hole, yeah. Okay. So, okay, we're in rigid mode. I'm going to shorten the stroke now. So I had to stroke high so I could get it in there. And when you have a panel that doesn't have a bunch of stuff on it, then you don't have to go through this procedure I'm doing right now. So I'm at the short. So the shorter the stroke, the smoother your bead action is going to be. The bigger the stroke, you may see a bead mark because of your movement. So every step over versus every hit might show a witness mark. So the shorter you get your stroke, the closer together the witness marks are, and the smoother everything is. All right, so make sure I'm doing it right. Yeah, pushing the bead up, that's correct, yes. And most of the time gives you a smoother bead profile. And it appears like it is giving me a nice smooth bead. So in aluminum, it's a one-shot deal. That's all bad. So in steel, you may have to do a couple passes, but most of the time you can get by with one hit. So, voila, hood scoop in a little over an hour.
Good job, Chris.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody for watching.